Hey, and welcome to 10 Questions About Film, a podcast where I ask filmmaker friends 10 questions all about film and their filmmaking process. In this episode, I talk to independent filmmaker Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey is a writer-director whose sci-fi films include the animated techno-fantasy Parallel Man and the forthcoming deep space adventure Persephone. He has directed short films, commercials, music videos, and documentaries. His futuristic underwater disaster movie, Oceanus, has reached over 4.4 million views on YouTube. Additionally, he has published children's books and graphic novels. Recently, he co-wrote a novelization of his film Persephone with the New York Times best-selling author Kevin J. Anderson of Dune and Star Wars fame. Early in his career, Jeffrey worked with the musician Prince as a dancer and choreographer, and later moved on to directing and producing for Paisley Park Studios. He has also created work for Project Universe, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Lockheed Martin, and the International Space University. In 2012, Jeffrey established his production company, Future Dude Entertainment, developing intelligent and optimistic action-adventure stories. Jeffrey is currently working on a new documentary, Beyond the Eagle Obsession, which explores the cultural impact of the spacecraft from the classic sci-fi series Space 1999, as well as his lifelong passion for science fiction. So, first of all, Jeffrey, thank you very much for agreeing to do this.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to finally meet you because we've been chatting on Facebook forever, I think.
It feels like I've known you for many years virtually, so it's neat to actually interact in person. So that's great. Yeah,
I think we nearly met a couple of years ago at NASA. I think it might have been Artemis was about to go up, and then they postponed.
Oh, yeah.
So right. I was in Florida at the time, and we were originally going to meet up at there, but then it didn't happen. Unfortunately,
it didn't happen. So
yeah, that's life.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get into these. So, question number one: tell me about yourself. What's your background? What have you done?
Well, as far as my background, I'm a filmmaker based here in the Midwest of the United States. I live in a state called Minnesota. I first started making my own little Super 8 films, and I was in about 8th grade. I think I was about 12 years old. I initially was interested in filmmaking because, like a lot of people, I saw Star Wars as a child, and I was a huge space enthusiast who was really into the real space thing, the real science sort of thing. And when I saw Star Wars, I was like, I wonder if I could grow up to use the technology and the kind of approach they did to make a space fantasy film, but use that to create realistic space adventures. I wanted to tell stories like The Martian, that sort of thing, right? Like realistic. How would you really get there? How would you survive? What's it like? That sort of thing. And so going all the way back to middle school, high school, started learning how to design spacecraft and do visual effects and those sorts of things. Ended up going to college for cinematography. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I'd moved up here to Minnesota, and I was working with Prince. There was quite a bit of a film scene at the time in the early 90s here. And you had Prince here, and there were the Coen brothers are from here. There were a lot of very talented filmmakers. So I had always had the goal of creating my own production company. And initially, I was doing music videos and commercials and documentary, but I continued kind of silently screenwriting and honing my craft and that sort of thing. Gosh, by the late 90s, I'd raised quite a bit of money to do I did some television pilots. I did a lot of documentary work, won some awards for some of the documentaries that I did something for President Clinton, actually, that did pretty well at the time. And then I ended up working with NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. And and I did a lot of educational public outreach work for NASA, which was visual, a lot of film and websites and exhibitions, those sorts of things. So that was really fun. But then, coming into the 2010s, I launched my current production company in 2010. The goal there is to take my own IP. I have a lot of different intellectual property concepts. We actually did a couple of short films. One was called Parallel Man, which is an animated movie that starred John Cho and Lance Reddick and Ming-Na Wen, that still quite popular. And then I did another one called Oceanus, which is an underwater live action movie. I've always found the idea of living underwater fascinating, so I thought I'd do a film about that. So we did a short film with that. Both of those films have got millions of views on the Dust channel on YouTube. And then I've got a number of live action feature films. I'm actually an Oceanus feature film that's in development, and also Persephone is another film that I'm doing. So yeah, that gives a little background into me. Yeah.
Fantastic. So really you started out on Super 8. What was your experience of using Super 8 and how did that get you rolling, really?
Well, it was fun because, you just had this little cartridge and you pop the cartridge in and you'd shoot things. We would do these little laser fights and stuff. My cousin and I, we would.
Did you used to scratch it in and then color it in? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, scratch it to make the little laser beams and stuff, and that was really fun.
Yeah, I did exactly the same.
We did. We built miniature spacecraft. Like I was a big Battlestar Galactica fan, so we built these ships that kind of kit bashed spaceships in his basement, and then we would do our little motion control passes with our Super 8 cameras along these kit bashed ships we'd made and stuff. And that was really fun. So we did a lot of that kind of stuff. The other one we did was we did like a dogfight between a paper airplane and an F-16.
Oh, nice.
And that was all using like fishing line and going out in the backyard and shooting, using a fogger to make clouds and things like that. So very creative stuff. It was fun, but we didn't develop it ourselves. We would take it, develop it, then take it to the drugstore, and they would develop it and you get it back, and everything.
2 weeks later, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it was a great way to start. It was a great way to start.
Absolutely. I mean, it's how I started. Exactly the same story. I went to see Star Wars. I decided I wanted to be involved in filmmaking. And I think about 8 or 9, my parents got me a Super 8 camera and off I went. And it was exactly the same. You'd go up to Boots, what we call Boots here, which is a chemist, and you'd go and buy your little cartridge for about £12 back in the day. And then, you'd have your 4 minutes. And the beauty of it was you learned to tell your stories in camera, because you didn't have the joy of being able to edit on non-linear like we do now or whatever. And so you had to really plan it.
Whatever you're going to do, you had to. It was turn it. You plan it. You turn it on. You turn it off. You turn it on.
And hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then you'd send it off, and then it'd come back, and the joy of opening that reel and playing that for the first time was amazing.
Absolutely.
Just the smell of it and the feel of it, and just threading it through the projector. All of those things I loved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that projector sound from back in the day, that wonderful up
against this like a sheet that you'd stick up on the wall. It's amazing. And I had the same thing. I mean, I basically decided to make film stars of all my friends. I was just suddenly like, we're all going to be big film stars, we're all going to be massive. And we'd sort of bunk over the wall of my Uncle Ray's garage. He had a garage, like a tire garage down the bottom of the road, and we used to bunk over the wall on the weekends and pretend it was some sort of science fiction space station, and it was amazing. But you look back at these things now, and they're so creative and they're so brilliant. And, just imagine if we'd had the ability, looking at the tools you've got now, like iPhones and things like that, what you could have done.
It's not even, it's inconceivable, the difference, right? And it's really quite amazing what we have now. But by the same token, I wouldn't trade those days.
Exactly right.
There was something about the analog nature of it and the being sort of forced to deal with the actual, you're working with your hands, you're figuring it out, you're using your mind. I mean, there was, it's interesting because I look at a lot of visual effects nowadays, and quite often they just don't look real to me. And I think that's because I think a lot of the young people who are doing effects work, they live in a video game world or a digital world, right? And so the physics of that are different, right? There are no physics, literally. You can do whatever you want. The camera can move 12,000 miles per hour. It can move over here. It can move, right?
Exactly.
Whereas, when there were the limitations of doing things with miniatures and motion control and optical printers and all those sorts of things, those limitations forced a different type of creativity.
It's gravity, isn't it, in physics? It's as simple as that. And one of the things I did back in the noughties, I did a teaser for a vampire film that I was close to getting made with Lionsgate, and I storyboarded the shit out of it. Of course you do, right? Yeah, I over-storyboard everything anyway. But there was a point where I had the camera, we're up on top of this multi-story car park sort of hotel place, and I'd had the camera out in the middle of nowhere, in the air, and the DP just said to me, how are we going to get the camera there? This is pre-drones, really.
Right.
We couldn't afford a helicopter shot. So,
Right.
drones were only just starting to become a thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I really don't know how we're going to get it there, but maybe we'll go and, get it on another building across the way and shoot across. But in the end, he kind of said, well, real world physics, it doesn't make sense that the camera's out there because whose point of view is it? And it was a real valuable lesson because...
Exactly. Who would actually be able to shoot that?
Yeah.
And that's, and that's one of the things, like, I think about, I look at a lot of these films that have these sort of sweeping digital vistas, right? They never look real to me because the camera is obviously moving at this, like I said, the camera would have to be moving 1,000 miles per hour. There's no scale to it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put that, there are many wonderful modern films, but there was something about what was happening back then that was different.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, the beauty of Super 8, just to bring it full circle, was the fact that, the joys of 4-minute storytelling. You had to tell it in your 4 minutes. That was it. A reel. And that was it.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, man. Super 8. That's going back some. Okay, let's move on. Question number 2. What was the spark? When did you know that this was how you were going to spend the rest of your life? And I guess, like me, you've just sort of answered that, really. It was Star Wars, right? I guess.
Yeah, it was. I was about... I don't know. I think I was 10 when I saw Star Wars, and I think by the time 11, I got that Art of Star Wars book.
Yeah, amazing.
Which was amazing. And that was like, I want to do this. I switched over from wanting to be an astronaut and a scientist to wanting to be a filmmaker who told stories about astronauts and scientists.
Did you come up with a plan at an early age, or is it just something you've kind of...
I did. I've always been a business person. I've always seen business as being really important. You have to have a sense of, if you don't want to make a film that's just for your friends and family and that you're watching in your basement, you have to have a plan to get it out to a broader culture. And so that was one of the things that I started studying. I was trying to understand what does a producer do? So by the time I was, say junior, senior in high school, I was like, I'm going to make my own production company. I'm going to do a film company.
What age would you have been around then?
Around then, I was probably about 16. So by the time I was 16, I was like, I'm going to have some sort of company. And then when I moved to the Twin Cities, it was really important to me to focus on development as an entrepreneur. And honestly, the majority of my time is not spent filmmaking. It's trying to raise money and trying to deal with investors and finance ideas, and everything, which is kind of frustrating. But honestly, once it gets going, and you're good to go. You're moving.
Well, I think that's one of the really key points of being an independent filmmaker is that you do have to be on top of that stuff, and you do spend an awful lot of your time essentially hustling,
right,
to find the money to make these things, right? So,
right,
and I think. That was a big lesson for me, I think, very early on, was the fact that, I had to get off my ass and actually do this stuff for myself because no one was going to come along with a big pot of money and say, off you go,
Nope.
So I think that's the hardest thing as a creative is to understand that you are part of the business. And
yes.
So how did you approach that? How did that affect the way you move forward?
Okay, so I've never had the ambition to make $100 million, $200 million films. Never been an interest of mine at all. First off, I think that's a waste of money. I think it's kind of disgusting, being honest, that they spend that much money on a film. And, find good filmmakers who get the business of film, right? Who are creative and talented, but also who are not going to blow through a bunch of money and waste it, right? I guess to answer your question, what I learned how to do was, okay, if I'm going to make something, I can't write things that I can't make. You could write something and say, and then 1,000 soldiers come over the hill, right? Okay, yeah. But the question is, can you afford to hire 1,000 extras, and can you afford to clothe the wardrobe for them and the weaponry? So my thought is, how do you tell a story with 5 coming over the hill that's just as epic and just as interesting, right? And it's not that I'm trying to say that I make small stories. I don't. I mean, like, for example, my Oceanus film, it's got a big idea in it, but I tell the story in a very contained environment inside a submarine with just a couple of people, right? So I figured out the way to tell a big story, but in a contained way that allowed us to work with the budget and within a budget parameter.
Yeah, but your films are still very visual. They are very still effects heavy in a lot of ways.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Particularly,
absolutely.
So they still convey that sense of visual style that makes them a little bit more than just 3 people stuck in a can, right?
Sure, so, I'm not trying to diminish it. What I'm trying to say is that's all storyboarding, as you said. I storyboard the hell out of everything. I plan it all out. I do tons of previs, so that it's that measure twice, cut once thing.
All right. Well, number 3, who is your biggest hero or influence?
I would say my greatest hero and influence is Dr. Carl Sagan.
I mean, Cosmos is one of those fundamental memories I have as a child watching that and being absolutely...
Yeah, it was watching that series and reading those books and everything. To me, he was popularizing this idea that humanity was capable of so much more, and looking at what we'd achieved and accomplished and how we were this part of the universe looking back on itself. And these are amazing concepts and ideas. Sagan, for me, and the fact that he was finding ways to sort of popularize science and bring it to the masses, I think it's incredibly important, and it's very sad. I mean, we desperately need a Sagan-type voice right now.
Yeah.
The culture needs it. We need those sorts of beacons, to carry us to more positive horizons,
I fully agree. Again, he's one of my heroes as well. It's just that notion that I think he humanized science. That's what he does. He humanizes it, and he makes you engage in it in a way that isn't dry. It's a real love of what he's doing.
Yes.
And that enthusiasm. Wonder. Awe of it.
Yeah, enthusiasm, as you say. That's the part that's so exciting, is to see somebody who was so in love with what he was doing, and in awe of the universe itself, and that was amazing. So I would say Sagan is sort of my number one hero, and it's certainly, with the work that I'm doing, I have a drive to try to bring science and scientific ideas to a broader audience, in a more positive way. So that's absolutely what it was. I would say number two for me would be Gene Roddenberry, in terms of what he did with the original Star Trek and then ultimately Next Generation. It's culture defining. It impacted our culture at such a level and in such a positive way.
Well, the breaking down of barriers that you see in that show right from day one is just incredible, right? So you grow up with that, and you don't think twice about those things.
No.
That suddenly, though, seem to be really important in our culture again, that we have to be having those same fights again. And it's
too bad. It's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. I have a lot of theories on that. I could do a whole podcast with you on that.
But maybe now isn't the time to go real world politics, because I think we both know where we stand on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Both really good choices.
It's funny. You were prompting me to think about, like, who are my film heroes? Do I have film heroes, right? It's like, the people that are more my heroes in film are more like Sid Mead or Joe Johnston or, Ralph McQuarrie, people who were the visualizers of the ideas.
They're world building people, aren't they?
The world building people are the ones that are the heroes for me. Those are the guys that I'm like, wow, that's really, really cool. Because at the end of the day, you don't have a lot of people like a James Cameron. He's an illustrator also, right? He designs and illustrates stuff. But a lot of, you get someone like George Lucas, and someone's bringing him, here are 10 designs, and he says, oh, I like that one, put them together. It's a very different mindset, than being the person who's like going, well, give me your script and I'm going to try to bring this to life, and I'm going to try to figure out what this is,
I think there's an interesting link between the people that you chose as well, like Sagan, and the production design people you're talking about, because it's still very science and engineering based, and the whole world building idea behind it, I guess, is quite a through line for you.
Absolutely.
Question number 4. Tell me about your first film, and what was it?
I would say my first real film was it wasn't a film. It was a pilot episode of a television series that I wanted to do.
Okay.
And I ended up raising hundreds of thousands of dollars here in the Midwest, because I wanted to bring a TV series here to produce, because we had the production infrastructure in place to do it. So it was called Endeavor, and it was about test pilots in the future. Oh. The whole idea is that we had these futuristic aircraft and spacecraft that were on the cutting edge, and you got this company that was doing private space initiatives, and they would hire these crazy test pilots it was kind of like the right stuff of the future.
Okay, sign me up. When are we doing it? That sounds great.
It's probably an idea that's worth still doing,
Yeah, I'd absolutely
I shot the pilot, and then I shopped it around LA, and I got people saying, this is really great. Do you want to move to LA? And I was like, well, I wanted to do this here, and I have investors, and I have people and crews, and I want to do this in Minnesota. And people were like, nah, we're not doing that, but you can come out here. We're happy to hire you, So I made the choice, and I decided to leave film for a while and work on education. And that's when I got into my educational path and did that. I was still doing film type stuff, but it was a pretty disappointing thing because I shot on 35 and beautiful locations, and it was really cool what we produced. But again, I didn't understand the economics of how it all worked, and if I could go back, I would have made an independent feature. That was a mistake, because I thought, man, I want to do a TV show. So, but what I didn't realize is you don't get to do independent TV. It doesn't work like that. So I didn't know, and my investors didn't know, and oh well.
So with the investors, I mean, how did they respond to that? Because I'm assuming they didn't get a sale, so therefore they didn't recoup. So
no, very, very wealthy people just took a write-off.
Okay.
They took a write-off, and I ended up stuck in debt. So it was not.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. That was I wasn't the rich guy in this case. So
the curse of the indie filmmaker.
But the rich guy did just fine.
Well, I suppose that like over here we used to have the EIS, which sort of still exists, but has changed. But it meant that you pretty much guarantee that an investor would be able to recoup most of their money in tax rebates. So it worked up to a degree, but too many people abused that system, and unfortunately it got changed. But yeah, investors are always the hardest thing, because again, it's something they don't teach you at film school you've got to get a pool of investors together, and you've got to keep them sweet, and you've got to keep them happy, and you've got to try and make them some money, and you've got to play the game a little bit. And again, it's one of them things you just don't get taught, really. No. So it's very difficult. I mean, I've been lucky with my investors over the years because I've always kept it quite small. I'm a real big believer in guerrilla filmmaking anyway, so I try and keep all the costs right down. That way, again, you write to your means, though.
Exactly. I mean, there are people who've seen some of the things that I've done and what I'm capable of, and they're like, oh man, you could do some of these big budget things someday. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. It's not about a fear. It's like, I don't want to be limited by a studio and a system and the money. This doesn't sound interesting to me at all.
Yeah.
And we're going to give you notes. Look, it's not that I don't want to hear somebody's view if they're financing, but at the end of the day, it's like, what are the notes? Why are the notes? What is it? It's, again, I don't want to come across as a film snob, because I'm not. But what I will say is I do believe that there was a time when the quality of what was happening, it wasn't being driven by the corporate side or the finance side.
Yeah, and we grew up during that time.
Right? So having seen the kind of movies and the kind of spectacle and the kind of ideas and risks that were being taken, the idea of something like a Tron, it's very hard to get new ideas like that across now. Where you say, I want to try this. I want to try something else. Well, they go, well, what would that cost? And then of course they put it through their system. They go, well, that sounds like that would cost blah, blah. And it's like, well, no, I could do it for this. Well, yeah, but we've got this guy who wants to make movies, and he's been making movies. And when he makes a movie, he can't do that for less than 80 million. I want to stay in this under $50 million range with these really carefully planned out, thought out films that take a few years to get made, and then make something really great and by the way, the last thing I would say too is that I believe that there's an audience for this sort of thing. There are guys like you and me, people all around the world who want to see smart,
completely,
well-made stories.
Completely.
They really, really do. I don't just want to see these franchise things over and over and over again. It's not that interesting to me, or having to reboot ideas or coming up with the upteen sequel to something, right? It's like, I know that there are filmmakers out there who have good ideas. The problem is the economics and figuring out how to get it done.
Well, the thing is, I'm sure that a lot of those films, as we would, if you're given the seventh or eighth sequel to something, you want to do an interesting spin on it. But the problem is the interesting spin isn't going to work with the idea that they want to make money. And that's always the problem, right? So you end up going, well, I can't do that. And, I don't want to just remake Star Wars. I don't want to do it. It's been done, and it was done beautifully in 1977. So why would I want to remake it now?
Why are we redoing this? Like, what is the point of this?
So unless you're going to bring something different to it, and then you get panned online anyway for doing something different. So it's very,
like Star Wars, for example, part of why I really like the Andor series is it feels like, man, that feels like a 1970s sci-fi project done with today's production capabilities. That's what it feels like to me. And the storytelling's dead on, I kind of wish... For me, I'm like, I wish that was it. I wish it was like, all these other Star Wars things are doing. It's like, that's the one. If you just had one, just do that.
And the irony is that's the one that slipped under the net, right?
Yeah.
You know, because you can tell that they just thought, well, no one's going to care about this, so let's not pay too much attention to it while we're too busy doing the other big shows, you know, the legacy characters. And actually, that's the one that, you know, for me, exactly the same. It's the one that's actually nailed it perfectly.
That's the one that nailed it. That's the one that's nailed it. That's like awesome. It's awesome.
But then I wouldn't want everything to be just a rehash of Andor either.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's why I'll watch something like Skeleton Crew and actually enjoy it for what it is, because, you know, the Goonies in space, what's not to like about that? You know, so I give it a free pass because it's not Andor, and Andor, I think, is a very special thing, you know, a little jewel that we need to cherish. Okay, let's move on. Question number 5. What is your worst filmmaking experience, and how has that defined you as a filmmaker?
I would say probably the worst filmmaking experience I had was in the late 90s. I was doing a sci-fi film called Timeless, which is a time travel movie about a guy who he's a physics professor. His wife gets killed and he ends up losing it, and he tries to figure out a way to go back and prevent her death. And in the course of this story, he begins to realize that he not only went back once to try to stop her death, he went back many times.
Okay.
And on the night of her death, he was there many, many times. He just wasn't able to pull it off. The moral of this story, this time travel story, was things only happen once. So in other words, if your wife is now dead, you could time travel, but whatever happened, it didn't work. So he starts to realize by the end of the film, as he starts to look around and start to see something always stopped him from saving her in this drive-by shooting. This was a really cool movie, and it was something that I was actually acting in it as well, and playing the lead. And I hit a little windfall. I had a little bit of money, and I decided to throw the money into this film. I wanted to make this movie. Which we
should never do.
Right? Yeah. This is well. You asked me the worst experience, so I know.
That's why I'm always in debt.
So I throw tens of thousands into this thing, and I'm going to make it, and we're going to shoot it on black and white, and we're going to make the Now I had two options. I could shoot it with what at the time they had digital beta, and we were going to take the digital beta. And the idea was shoot it all, edit it, and then transfer it to film.
Okay.
Then transfer it to 35. At the time, it wouldn't have been perfect. It wasn't where the digital transfers are. Well, now we've got amazing digital cameras and the whole thing's right. It's all changed. But at the time in the late 90s, it was still a way we could have gotten it done. Yeah. Shooting like on Super 16 or 35, and then the lab costs, all the processing. Dailies, all that, it was going to kill us. It was just going to kill us. And so I was like, we should do it this way. And what happened was I was stupid, and I let my cinematographer talk me into moving away from the shooting on video to let's shoot this on film. So I'm like, okay, so we ran the numbers. We were like, okay, well, I think we can try to figure this out. We're there trying to shoot it on film. And right in the middle of it, the stock market had a crash, a big dip. And all the investors I had walked. All of them walked. And so I was stuck holding this film that we shot, 30% of it, 40% of it. The other thing that started happening, I didn't realize, is that the film industry here was starting to die already. And I'm on set, and I'm there because I was both acting and directing. I'm relying on other people to produce who did not have the experience to really hold the line as producer, right? So I'm there in costume looking around, and I'm like, who are these people? Right? I'm seeing all these stagehands and all these folks. And so what happened is crew members started going, well, come on down. They're making a movie. Come on down. I can use you.
Right, okay.
Right? Suddenly I'm getting invoices from people I've never heard of. There's all this stuff. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? It was insane. Honestly, it was infuriating. And, by the time this thing was over, we just had to shut it down. It was like a huge hole, and nobody cared. They were just like, yeah, oh, great. There's a gravy train here. And it's like, well, this gravy train was my money. It was a very painful experience. And I came out of that saying I was never going to let that happen again. Letting somebody talk me into an approach that really wasn't the approach that I wanted to take as a filmmaker. I needed to stand my ground and say, no, we need to light the shit out of this thing. I should have fired that guy. I should have gone, look, you don't want to shoot it, don't shoot it. I'll find somebody else to shoot it. We're going to light this thing, and we're going to figure out how to take advantage of the digital beta. And then we're going to take that, and then we're going to figure out how to turn this into a feature-looking movie. That's what I should have done.
Yeah, but I mean, in the fog of it, it's always a bit hard, isn't it, to see it clearly when you're right in the middle of it, and especially when you're doing multiple roles. Funny enough, I took a similar route in around 2001, because up until that point, I was shooting on 16mm. And I was making a lot of what I call little test films. I wanted to learn more about the process. So if there was something, I wanted to learn more about lighting, I would make a little test film. So I'd write a little film, maybe 2 minutes, just so I was hands-on with lighting. Or if I wanted to do something that I was going for a specific editing style, I would make these films. So I made maybe 7, 8 of these, 16 mil. But, each time I was shooting, it was costing me $2,000. To just put together a couple of minutes. And then I just thought, well, actually, this is around the same time that the Canon XL1 came out. And I thought, well, I could buy one of those.
I used to shoot with that all the time.
Yeah, buy one of those and buy a Fujinon, manual lens, and off you go. To me, it just made sense. So I bought one of those, and for £15,000, I made my first film shot on that. The plus side, though, was I had a friend who worked in a post house in London, in Soho. So I would get every evening free in the color grading suite. Now, that's the plus side. And they were fine with it because they wanted to train up.
I was going to say they probably wanted to.
So for them, it was a win-win because basically, it wasn't a big production. So if their guys came in and screwed it up, they didn't really care. But if they came in and did a good job, they've trained them up. So it was a really good thing. But it meant we had 6 months of grading mini DV footage to get it up to a fairly decent standard. But the truth is you've still got to light it properly in the first place. You've still got to you have to get it right.
You have to light it, right? Well, you heard me say that. It's like we needed to light it. We had to light it. That's exactly. That's the thing. But so that was my worst filmmaking experience. That was my worst.
In terms of what that gave you at the end, you said that you feel like you would never make that mistake again. But what did that give you? A determination or a sense of understanding or a sense of I'm going to learn how to produce?
I think it's understanding, right? It's like, with any of these experiences, I've never been one to make the same mistake and expect different results, right? You got to learn from this stuff and go, what the hell? Don't do that again. I think part of why I've been able to maintain a production company and maintain an entrepreneurial lifestyle for so long is because I've been willing to really tear these things apart and not go, hey, we're not going to beat ourselves up and we're not going to tell ourselves, sell ourselves that we're garbage or something, but we do need to look at ourselves openly and say, what mistakes did we make? How can we do better? How can we go forward? And how can we try to optimize so this doesn't occur again? It doesn't mean it doesn't occur again sometimes, but I think having that attitude changes things and moves you in a much better position.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And also, I think it's understanding that you don't know it all.
You don't know it all.
Yeah,
right,
so
exactly.
it's like learning music. It's with music, it's exactly the same. It's a lifelong thing. It's a lifelong process. You never ever master it. You can just be as good as you can possibly be on that day and move forward and learn from it. Okay, so moving on. Question 6 then is, what is your best filmmaking experience, if that's your worst, and how has that helped you as a filmmaker?
I would say, doing the Oceanus film was a lot of fun simply because we moved fast. We shot that in about 9 days. I'm not a filmmaker who yells and screams at people. I'm not somebody who, feels like I can create this sort of cycle of abuse that some of these dudes seem like. I don't get it. Help, it's like, well, I'm in charge here, so I get to abuse you. It's like, I don't think that's the way to get what you want out of your crews and the people you work with. I try to be the iron fist and the velvet glove kind of thing, right? It's like that thing where it's like, look, I know what I want. I always know what I want. I know how to approach it. I'm open-minded if there's something that I learned that I didn't expect, but I also want to be sure that I get what I'm trying to get out of my team. So part of it for me is making sure you have the right team going into it, and then everyone's on the same page. The times that I've seen it fall apart is when you're not on the same page. You got a crew and you're fighting each other creatively. Mm-hmm. It's going to show in the product. In this case, I had a fantastic AD and this guy named Eli Sasich who worked with me. Eli and I really saw eye to eye. We really agree on a lot of movies and the approach to filmmaking and that sort of thing. So he and I were able to really break the script down and figure out how can we make this work where we've got these two characters in this submarine set, and this was before we had LED volumes and things like that. Yeah. We're shooting against a blue screen, with a reflector to create the ocean environment. We did all this stuff. Some of it was very old school and some of it was innovative, what we were doing. But it just clicked. It was one of those things where it clicked. But it clicked because we planned it out. We really planned it out. We had really good storyboards. I had really good previs. One of the things that I've noticed with visual effects films, when there isn't solid previs, especially if the actors aren't able to actually see what it is, you can tell. You can just tell. Their eyes are glazed over. There's this emptiness. It's like, no, look at this tennis ball. This tennis tennis ball. That's the monster, the tennis ball, you know? And it's like, well, what does the monster look like? Well, try to visualize. It's got big teeth and it's coming at you, but they see this tennis ball, right? You know?
And now act.
Action, you know? And I don't want to do that. And so what I did is I literally had my laptop and I was there on stage with the actors, and I'd show them a previs and say, this is what you're seeing. This is how the submarine is maneuvering. And what you're seeing is this, and this is what's outside. So when you interact with it, you've got to give me that. Show me that you're seeing this. But they were able to see it because I did all the previs before we shot.
It's just doing your job, isn't it? It's being prepared.
I think so.
Prep is everything.
Preparedness is everything.
Yeah.
It just is. I think it's everything. And I don't know, personally, I just think it frees you.
Yeah.
I think being prepared frees you up. And again, it's not that I'm saying, hey, there's no room for spontaneity. I mean, I think some people feel like if you're overly prepared, you're not there for if something magical happens. It's like, no. I'm open to magic happening on stage. Like, oh, that's in there. Let's do that. Right. Of course. And if my actors had something that they're like, hey, man, I'm thinking about this. Could we deviate a little bit? You know, because I know actors who don't like often working with sort of writer-director sometimes, because the writer can be a real jerk to the director in that case sometimes. Like, you know, it's like this sort of schizophrenic, you know, relationship where the writer's going, hey, that's not what I wrote. That's not what I wrote. I see the writing as an initial roadmap. And when you're on stage, it's like, hey, this is our direction we can go. But if something new happens, it's like you got to run with it. You got to see what you can do with it. So to me, the parameters of preparedness are important to allow for creativity and spontaneity to happen because you're just so well planned. So when I did that underwater film, first I was a big challenge to try to say, we're going to make a film. Literally the only water we had in the entire movie was a cup of water that a stagehand poured around the ring of the airlock when they opened the hatch. Right. Other than that, so all the water we had, everything was computer generated or done by lighting effects and things like that. And we pulled it off. That was a really great experience. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I think being prepared for me is one of the key things. A lot of what you touched on there is the simple fact that if you're prepared, you're not constantly trying to catch up.
Right. Well, which also leads to stress, right? Yeah. You're suddenly stressed because you're like, we're behind, and the crew and everyone's like, oh my God, we're behind. What are we going to do? How are we going to get? And everyone's stressed out, and that stress and that tension starts to build and build and build, and then it's affecting the actors. It's affecting it affects everything. It affects the whole thing.
Yeah.
So to me, preparedness allows for a calmer nature in how you approach these things, and I think leads to a better product.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently have been directing this interactive movie called Equinox, and I've spent 2 years storyboarding it because for every choice within the story, there's multiple scenes or versions of the same scene. So you have to be prepared, because if you're not, you're suddenly halfway down the scene, multiple choices of a scene where the character could be in a completely different part of the room. So it's just understanding all of the logic of that in itself. You know, the only way you can do that is being prepared in the first time. And even then, it doesn't stop those moments of scratching your head going, where am I? What's going on here?
Oh, absolutely.
What's my name again? You know, and, you know, we had a team of 4 of us trying to keep track on that. And, you know, it's very hard, but you get around it. And because we're prepared, there's been a lot of improvisation around those moments, because we're not always stressed about, oh no, where are we, what we're doing, where are we going to be next. There is enough of an understanding to be able to enjoy that process and then have those moments of spontaneity. And I think that's movie magic comes from those little moments, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
It's a joyful thing. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Question number 7. How did you get your first film sold or distributed? Was it through a company or did you self-distribute?
So let's go back to Oceanus. What we ended up doing there is a couple things. We worked with a distributor called Mill Creek Entertainment that did the Blu-ray for us. And then that Blu-ray we were able to get carried on Amazon and other places. Apple carried it. So we were able to get it into streaming. I mean, I basically consider that to be us doing it, you know, because we found a local company and did this, but the company happened to be really big and they're really good at what they do. So that was really great. You know, distribution's always been a real challenge. I mean, the sad part for me, I'm going to tell you the sad part of the story, which is that when I made Oceanus, my thought was, I'm going to make this kick-ass 30 minutes and I'm going to leave it with a cliffhanger and I'm going to go to the studios and streamers, hopefully someone's going to swoop in and go, this is great. Let's either finish this or turn it into a show or turn it into a movie, or let's reboot it. Let's do it. Okay, this is great. We get the idea. This is the prototype. Let's go take it forward. And what I ran into was consistent. This isn't Star Trek, Star Wars, Alien, this list of sort of things. And it was like, what's this like? Was always the question I get. It was incredibly difficult to get a studio to come on. They just wouldn't. I think part of the problem, that in that coming out of like 2000 to 2010, 2012, there were people who were filmmakers who were making these great shorts, and then studios were going, okay, great, now we're going to give you the funds to go blow it up. But that died, and I happened to have made Oceanus right at the time that was dying. And I still, to this day, I get letters from people all the time going, I love that. Why didn't it get turned into something more? Again, that's another one where I wish I had just stopped and said, okay, we got something so awesome. How do we shoot another week and a half and actually turn this into a full feature?
Yeah.
But again, I was hoping that we were going to get a studio to come in. And I think we were also right at that time. It was right when the streamer thing was really taking off, and people didn't really understand the power the streamers were going to have. The streaming really changed the model. It changed the model of filmmaking so much.
But I don't think the streamers even understood that at the beginning, to be honest.
I agree with you.
Because Netflix was just hoovering up everything. I had a few things on Netflix on the early days, and you just think you just won't get those deals anymore because...
Well, I met with them about it, and I showed them, but I was with these two. There was nothing personal at all. I met with these guys, though, at the time. It was right when they were really taking... These guys were exhausted. They were bleary-eyed. They were just tired and negative, and there was just not... I think that if I had come in there with Steven Spielberg open the door for me, they would have been like, oh, okay, well, we'll listen. You know what I mean? But it's like, who was I, right? It's that sort of thing. So,
but it did end up on Dust, didn't it?
Yes, so we did end up eventually putting it on Dust, and it's done
4.7 million or something
like that. Yeah, so, and that actually now is getting people's attention to, we're now in a world where the model is changing to where, because of that level of views we have, now it's like, well, you got millions of people interested in this thing. So it looks like that's going to lead me to have the money to make a film of Oceanus finally.
It's not interesting that it's taken that, essentially a social following.
Yes,
online,
it's taken a social following to prove that it's got the value to
that it's got an audience. Yeah. But I think that's the way for a lot of young filmmakers now coming up. That's going to be their only option, because I think you're absolutely right. That middle ground movie, no longer exists.
No, it doesn't.
There's not a market for it. And
no, it's really weird. It's so interesting you talk about that. It's like, because that's my film Persephone. One of the struggles we've had with that is that it's budgeted around that zone. And it's like, well, you can do something for like under 15, under 10. People say, can you make this for 5? I'm like, well, not really. It's a space movie with sets and costs, and I can make a shitty version for 5 million. You know what I mean? It's like, you want to make a good one. 20 million is not that bad. But they're like, yeah, we don't even think, like, there's like this range now of like under 10 and over 50.
So maybe that is the only option left to a project like that, was you aim for higher, 75 to 100 million, and hope to get an A-lister on board. Maybe that's...
Well, the problem is you want to make it for under 10, they want you to get an A-lister on board. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. That's why, this actor thing is bizarre. This idea that you have to have A-list actors in everything. That's an aspect of the streaming that's happened, where there's an expectation that you have to have, because you're trying to get eyeballs, right? So the idea is you have to have some person of note. It's made filmmaking extremely difficult.
Well, I think a lot of that, again, it comes back to the corporate mentalities, isn't it? Because, you've got to have that opening weekend. If you don't have that opening weekend, then your film's going to be dead in the water. I mean, it's always kind of been around, but it's a relatively new driver as a business plan, because you go back to the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, the opening weekend was important, but it wasn't the life of the film. Whereas now that's what it is.
Well, you also could have films like Star Wars. I didn't know who Mark Hamill was.
No, exactly.
Right?
No one cared.
I didn't know who Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, or I didn't know who any of those people were. And it didn't matter to me either. I didn't
even know who Alec Guinness was.
I didn't know who Alec Guinness was.
I was a 7-year-old kid. Why would I?
No, exactly.
It's interesting. Mickey 17. I just went to see Mickey 17, which I really liked. I get why certain people might not like it, but I enjoyed it a lot. For me, that's a very telling thing, because that didn't do very well. on its opening weekend. And now they're talking about 18 days before the digital release. So it's getting released sometime around now. By the time this goes out, it will already been released. 18 days. It's insane.
It's almost like for some of these films now, the theatrical release is just a commercial for the digital when it doesn't do well, when it doesn't reach expectations. But see, like that film, the budget was about 120, I think.
It's something like that. It's around that roughly.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, it's sort of like, that's a hard one, to spend 120 on that, because it's not something that was going to appeal to it. To me, I could see that it would appeal to a very quirky, very specific audience, right? And so that feels like a $20, $30 million, $50 million movie to me. As far as what the market is for it and the story idea, right? So it's almost like you create, when you spend 120, then who knows what you spend on the marketing for that film. Let's say by the time you're done, another 100 million. So now we spent, $200+ million on this thing. I don't know if it was a good decision making.
What's interesting about it is that we are now at a phase where I think, Warner Brothers, for example, who put that out, I think it's Warner Brothers, they basically are willing to spend 120 million on a film like that, which, traditionally would have been something like Silent Running, in back in the day. It's all self-contained on a spaceship. And you kind of think there's no way in its day Silent Running would have been, the equivalent of a $120 million movie, right? And yet it was a big effects movie, it had robots, it had big sets, and it's a similar kind of movie you're making. I think that's the problem is, a movie like Mickey 17 has got no chance of recouping, on an opening weekend because of exactly that, because it's not $120 million worth of movie.
It's not.
And so that's just bad accountancy, which, considering it's being run by accountants, you'd think they would have more of a grip on it, right?
Bad decision making. And what's frustrating is then I'll hear people say things like, well, this proves that independent science fiction is not a good bet. Well, hold on.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
That's ridiculous. And I've seen articles like that. Mickey 17 proves that independent filmmaking is not, sci-fi filmmaking is not the way to go with this kind of, or that people only want the franchises. No, that's not true at all. It's just you have to have smarter cost to concept ratio. I think it just came up with something new right there. Cost to concept ratio.
It's responsible budgeting, and that's what any good producer should be doing. But the problem is the studios, I think, are just saying, it's a big sci-fi film, so let's give it a big budget and we'll sell it as that. But the truth is then it's missold, right? And it's We'll move on. Question number 8. What does it mean to be a filmmaker to you? How would you describe what you do?
The number one thing for me is that I've always been a storyteller ever since I was a child. I think storytelling is what it really is about for me, and I think film is a medium with which you can tell. There are those who tell me, I'm not a big video gamer, but there are those who tell me that video games are actually becoming a place where you can tell the kind of the biggest brush of storytelling, right, in a lot of ways. But I think film is such an amazing medium for storytellers. And I guess that's what it is for me, is that it's not so much about film, it's about storytelling. And it's also about the idea that you can impact people's lives. There's a responsibility that I feel that film could have, and maybe should have. I don't think it achieves that responsibility very often, but I think when I say that responsibility, that doesn't mean that every film has to be some super deep 3-hour epic of some sort. There can be something as light as a comedy. But I think that, to me, it's like, is it a story that needs to be told? And is it something that will touch people, whether it makes them laugh, whether it makes them cry, whether it makes them experience something that they've never experienced, and maybe lead to a sense of empathy for someone else's situation, and going, hey, I've never experienced what it was like to be a coal miner, but I watched that movie and it helped me understand what it might be like to be a coal miner. Maybe in the real world, I would think differently if I hear about coal miners, or I would, I'm not trying to be too specific, but it's just, there's something really magical and important about film. As a storyteller, that's what I care about.
It's interesting. Everyone I've spoken to so far has agreed that is primarily what being a filmmaker is a storyteller. It always feels like a modern day equivalent of cave people sitting around a fire, sharing stories and knowledge and passing on experience. And it's a communal process, even though we all sit in the dark watching a big silver screen and we don't really talk. But, you know, it is that communal experience in a way that maybe going to see a band live is, you know, a concert. You know, so for me, it always harkens back to that cave person mentality of sitting around a fire, sharing stories and learning about who we are and our place in the world.
Absolutely.
We're getting towards the end now. So question number 9. Tell me about the best gadget or tool that helps you as a filmmaker.
I think storyboards are my favorite thing. I think that transition between concept art to storyboards, really understanding the world building of, okay, we're on a spaceship. Well, what does the spaceship look like? All right. How does the spaceship function? Yeah. I mean, we're not going to show you all the stuff that it does, but I got to be able to, as a filmmaker, understand where are we? Okay, I'm in the spaceship. There was this TV series a few years ago called Chernobyl that was on HBO. You know, that was a case where they built that world and you understood what we were dealing with. So then when we were thrust into that situation, you felt emotion as you were pulled through the circumstance, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like storyboards are the tool that lets you do that. It's like understanding what's my place, where am I, who am I with, what's my location, who are my characters, what do I want them to do, how do I want to set this up, how do I want to tell this story. I think storyboards are the most important tool for me that I like the most.
I'd agree. For me, it's always about the storyboard allows me to ask the question, how am I going to tell this in a way that the audience get what I'm trying to say, get all the information that they need to get from the script, and fundamentally, how I can convey in a shot the emotions and the experiences that the characters are going through so that the audience understand that and can empathize with that. That process of moving from script to storyboard is vital, really, in a way that a shot list doesn't quite do it.
No, it's not in the.
It's useful
because you can have a shot. It's useful, you know, from a production standpoint, right? You need a shot list to go. How do we keep this moving? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish today? But there's a shot list. But the shot list to me has to correspond to the storyboards.
I mean, even on just a fundamental level, if a character is meant to be big and imposing, what's my point of view of him, right, you know, or her? How am I looking at this character through the eyes of the lead character or whoever the character is? And how am I positioning the audience so that they understand that this is a big, imposing person, right? I think you can't necessarily get that from a shot list, whereas a storyboard bangs straight away.
You can't, because a shot list is just that. It's a list, and that list can give you some basic information, but it doesn't have the visual sense, you know, of what we're looking for. So
here's the storyboard's the best thing, right? Okay, and the last question. That doesn't mean it'd be a short one necessarily, but Question number 10. Finally, what is the one thing you wish someone had told you when you first started out?
My career, because like I said, I started really in earnest in like 1991, right? So so I just turned 21, 22 years old. And, you know, the idea that like I'd still be here, this is a long road and you're gonna have to be really patient. And, you know, if someone came back in time, it's funny when you say that, because like if someone were to tell me, hey, man, you know, everything that you thought you were going to be able to do or that people told you they believed you could do, people who believed in you, you're still not there yet. You know, it's that thing of like, I'm climbing to the top of the mountain and I just have to stop sometimes and keep enjoying the view because the summit's still up there. And it's just realizing that I will get to the summit and I will achieve what I'm meaning to do. I'm going to get there. But man, is it taking a long time. What I think people don't understand is that when we're watching these films, we don't have any clue as to how long it takes for a lot of good movies to get made, good ones, right? I mean, there are films that are taking 15, 20 years, you know, and I, you know, I've had to explain this to investors that I work with. It's like, why is this taking so long? And it's like, well, the problem is there's so many variables. I think that's what I would talk to myself about, is that you need to be prepared for the variables. It's like, if there are paths that look like they're going toward a dead end, change path. That's what I would tell myself, because what happened is I think there are times that I wasted more time in a dead end than I would have spent just trying to go out and find new paths.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, there's this investor and this investor says they're interested in this thing and we're working on this business plan and I think this is going to happen. And they said they were going to do this and they said they were going to do this. Well, they just said no. Well, they said maybe. Well, okay, we'll keep working on them. It's like, dude, go find somebody else. Take that energy you have and don't put it into that because it's not going to pay off. Now, that doesn't mean be impatient. and rush through, your connections or potentialities, but it does mean where it's starting to feel like you're bumping against a barrier, it's probably really there.
Yeah.
And you probably need to either step over it and go somewhere else or turn around and go a different direction. That would be my number one advice to myself.
That's a great piece of advice. It's something I did myself in my own career very early on. So in the noughties, that vampire film I was talking about earlier on, we had a lead actress lined up who, I won't mention names because it's not fair to her. She ended up dying, which is why the project fell apart.
Sorry to hear that.
I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, so I won't go into the detail. But, obviously at that point, you kind of realize it's just a film and actually that's someone's life.
Right.
That's a tragedy. The thing of it is at that point, I'd already invested 5 years into this project, and I was working with a producer who, he was a blagger, should we say? We call him over here blagger, a hustler, and he kind of got it so far along, but we just kept coming up against brick walls, and there was a point where I just said, I need to pull the plug on this because we've been working and it's just not happening. And when she died, that's kind of what I did. I walked away and I decided to go and make a road movie instead with next to nothing, a digital SLR, and off I went, me and the actor in a car, and that's it. We went and did it. Went back to guerrilla filmmaking. Always go back to just doing something,
just get something done,
change course. Yeah. The irony is with that film, it was meant to be a very quick, let's just shoot it and get it out. It ended up taking forever, and still I've gone back in and reopened the edit recently because I'm not happy with it. Right. So what's the point of putting it out? Because I don't need to rush it. So I'm going to put it out when I am happy with it. I went down that path, and suddenly that was, that hits a brick wall. So I think that's an ongoing part of the process of filmmaking. Filmmaking history is littered with projects that never get made.
It's absolutely.
Or half made or partially made. So I think it's having enough savvy to sort of say to yourself, right, okay, now's the time to move on to the next project and circle back around if it comes out.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm even saying, even within that project, right? It's like sometimes you go, well, I want to get this done, but this is not the path to get it done.
Exactly.
If I keep doing this, I think that in some ways that, if I look back over the time that I've worked on this, I certainly could shave off a couple of years. Maybe the couple of years would have been spent trying to find others, but at least I would have done the work instead of wasting time down paths that weren't going to lead to anything.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, that project, the vampire one, that was 20 years ago. It then got picked up for an option by a company in Ireland, and it was part of a package of films they were trying to get financed at the time. I wasn't involved in that. I just optioned it out to them. And after about 5 years, they didn't get the money they wanted to make the package of films. So it reverted back to me, and it's just sat in my drawer doing nothing for 10 years, really, until about a month ago. And then I decided, well, actually, because of the technology we have now, I might as well rewrite it as a radio play. And so that's what I'm going to do. So it'll get done, but just in a completely different way. But it's a story being told, and that's what we aim to do, right? So
that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
What's next for you? What's coming up next?
Well, I'm completing a documentary I'm working on as a feature-length documentary. It's going to be around 90 minutes, maybe a tiny bit longer. It's called The Eagle Obsession. It's a love letter to a lost era. It starts with looking at this sci-fi spaceship called the Eagle, which was in this show called Space 1999. But at the end of the day, it's a story about what it was like for so many of us growing up at the time who believed that the future was going to be a very different place than it turned out to be. And there's hope in it. It's optimistic. It shows and rekindles the spirit of what it felt like at that time. And I'm very excited about what's happening with some amazing interviews in there. I've been able to meet all these childhood heroes. I got to do interviews with people like Nick Tate and Barbara Bain and William Shatner and one of the astronauts, Charles Duke, who walked on the moon. There's an amazing group of people in this film that I've been able to put together. The film's not about Space 1999.
Okay.
Space 1999 is there, but it's really kind of a foundation.
So that's a jumping off point.
It's a jumping off point. I made a film that will work for fans of Space 1999, but at the end of the day, I'm making this film to reach millions of people who have never even heard of it.
Yeah, how did you get into it? I mean, I grew up with it here in the UK. It was always on TV I think it was every Saturday morning. And it's one of those shows I've always loved as well, because the Eagle it's very iconic. It's the reason that the Millennium Falcon now looks the way it does, isn't it? Because the original...
Watch the movie. Watch the movie.
So you've got it in there, right? Okay. I won't talk about it then.
Yeah, that's in the movie.
It's in that era of sort of Doctor Who, Blake Seven, around the era of those kind of shows that are quintessentially British in a way, the way they're made,
I was kind of that guy. It's weird. I was this American kid, but I've always related to England. I'm always related to the culture, the music. For some reason, it just kind of resonated with me. And like the first sci-fi show I ever watched was Jerry Anderson's UFO.
Right.
So it wasn't bizarre for me to growing up as an American kid hearing these English accents.
Okay.
As I watched these shows and everything, right? That was really cool to me. So watching Space 1999 as a child, I've always related. It was on in syndication in the U.S. So I saw it Saturday night at like 6 o'clock or something. It came on. I was very little. I was probably 7, 8 years old when it first came on, but it worked. I got it and I got into it. But subsequently, I think something like The Prisoner, the Patrick McGowan series, that's another one that's a favorite of mine. I loved all that kind of stuff. And so I got way into it and it's influenced me a lot. I will tell you, to be this American kid, to grow up and then, travel to Pinewood Studios and get to meet Brian Johnson, who created The Eagle, and all these people and stuff. This has been a really neat journey. So this film, when you see it, it's a very personal film. It's a personal journey. It's not a talking head documentary. This is a journey where you're following me through this memories and exploration. It's very cinematic. It's very big in scale. I approached it like a motion picture. So I'm pretty excited for people to see it.
I'm excited to watch it.
That'll be finished. It'll be finished in early May. Okay.
And where can people find out more about you, Jeffrey?
If you go to futuredude.com, you can learn all about my projects and all the different things we're doing. Another thing is Eagle Documentary is a great source for the documentary project.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you inviting me on and doing the work you do, and keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, well, I've got no other choice. I was made this way, so this is it.
Yeah. I get it.
I'm at that age. I don't know what else I would do.
I'm the same way. It's like I just, this is it. We're gonna figure this out. We're gonna make it happen. So
that's kind of what this podcast is about. Really, is just connecting with my fellow filmmakers such as yourself. People who are just kind of mavericks and doing it their own way and just plowing a path to themselves. And I think that's really important because all my filmmaking heroes are those kind of people.
Yeah.
And I'm so inspired by this group of people that I've managed to put together as friends and colleagues, really, and it's just amazing to be part of it. And
it's amazing.
So I just want to share that with people, really, and get that out there. So that's what this podcast really is about. It's just me sort of going, hey, I can talk to these people who are cool, watch what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that. And this is something different from what from the studios, what they're trying to do. So
yeah, absolutely. My thing is, the way that Tyler Perry, I don't think I've never watched a Tyler Perry movie. I'm aware of Tyler Perry as a filmmaker and artist, but when I look at his model and I see a guy who he found an underserved audience and he said, I'm just going for that audience. I'm going to make stuff for them. And I don't care if the rest of you don't get it. And I don't care if the studio system doesn't get it. They get it. And they will come and they will watch it and they will pay for it. And he's built a huge empire doing that. That's what I want to do with this realistic sci-fi that I'm trying to create. That's my plan, is to be like the sci-fi equivalent of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's my goal.
I think that's a really good place to finish. There is an audience out there and we will find it. It's as simple as that, isn't it, Brennan?
We'll find it. That's what I'm saying.
Well, we are finding them. That's the thing, gradually.
That's why I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you again. I really appreciate that. That was a great chat.
Thank you.
Massive thanks to Jeffrey for being a guest on the show. You can find out more about Jeffrey and his films at allthews.futuredude.com. That's www.futuredude.com. This has been a Workshop Presents production.
Music by Christopher Nelson.
If you like this episode, feel free to check out the others. Thanks for listening. See you next time.